Welcome to Direct Talk. Our guest today is Tetsu Nakamura. He's a physician who since the 1980s has worked to provide medical care in Pakistan and Afghanistan. In the early 2000s, Nakamura also began an initiative to eliminate widespread hunger in the region. He built irrigation canals in a drought-plagued part of Afghanistan. They were the cornerstone of a project that secured a stable food supply for 600,000 people. In recognition of his efforts, in 2018, Afghanistan's president awarded him a special commendation. We asked Nakamura how he has succeeded in the face of huge challenges.
This photo was taken in 2010 in the deserts of eastern Afghanistan. Just 1 year later, that same location had become a flourishing wheat field. Since 2009, Tetsu Nakamura has helped to turn over 16,000 hectares of desert into arable land. Running through these newly green places are irrigation canals he built together with the local communities.
As a doctor, nothing is better than healing patients and sending them home. And this is something similar. A hospital treats patients one by one, but this helps an entire village. I love seeing a village that's been brought back to life. But the fact of the matter is that it's not just me doing it. It's the cooperation of the locals. And in addition, we need the cooperation of Mother Nature more than anything. It's really the awesome power of water.
Tetsu Nakamura was born in 1946 in Fukuoka Prefecture. After finishing medical school, he worked as a physician in local hospitals. In 1984, he embarked on a new chapter. A hospital in Peshawar, Pakistan was looking for a doctor from Japan who could work in a remote village. Nakamura says he was drawn to the natural beauty of the region and decided to take up the post.
The commitment was 5 or 6 years. That sounded manageable. My plan was to come home when I was done. My mission was to create a treatment center for people with Hansen's disease. When I got there, I was surprised to find that I would be treating hundreds of patients, but we would only have 16 beds. We really had no resources. With Hansen's disease, you need to do surgery, and there's a rehab period. You have to treat it in phases. We didn't have the proper facilities to do that at all. But I couldn't just run away and abandon these people.
In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, Pakistan's neighbor. Many Afghans fled across the border into Pakistan. And many of these refugees came to Nakamura seeking medical treatment. Eventually, with the help of an international NGO, he opened a clinic in Afghanistan in 1991.
I was there at the border, so I was destined to do this work. Circumstances were such that I couldn't just ignore the Afghans. In every sense, Afghanistan was a poor country. Compared to Pakistan, there was an overwhelming number of people who needed help.
In 2000, Afghanistan was faced with an additional hardship, an unprecedented drought. Every day, Nakamura saw patients whose health had failed to the point that they were on the verge of death.
You would hear a child screaming in the waiting room, and you would go to the child, an outpatient, but by the time you got there, they would be dead. That sort of thing happened almost every day. The reason was because they were so malnourished. And when they say the region lacked water, the truth was that it lacked clean water. So it was very easy to get sick. Usually, diarrhea won't kill a person, But if you're already malnourished and your body is weak, it can easily lead to death. So my thinking was that if those patients had had clean water and enough to eat, then most of them would have survived.
Nakamura began to collect food donations, even temporarily returning to Japan at one point. And then he worked with local communities to build wells. Between 2000 and 2001, around 600 water sources were dug up. But these efforts were not enough to eliminate starvation in the region. Nakamura had another idea: build irrigation canals in an area that had become arid, create farmland, and secure a food supply for the people.
Starvation, drought, medicine can't solve these problems. We realized that we needed to go beyond the narrow field of medicine and work to ensure that people had enough food and water. It was a big shift in my efforts. And it wasn't that we gave up on medicine. We saw tackling the water issue as having evolved out of offering medical care. Good water could bring a village back to life. My job is helping people be healthy, and good water reduces so many types of illness. And water creates food, so people weren't malnourished anymore. It felt like it was just an extension of what we were doing as doctors.
Nakamura's plan involved digging an artificial canal that would branch off from a river near its source in the mountains. It would bring water to the arid region and turn it into arable land. But that plan did not unfold easily.
There were so many issues we faced on the project. We just didn't have the equipment. It's not like Japan, where you have companies and engineers to work with. So that was the situation. The idea that the local communities would build and maintain the canals themselves. And unlike Japan, the government provides very little backing. So the local people had to be able to build it and maintain it themselves. Otherwise, it wouldn't last. So we were never going to be able to make some pristine concrete structure like you'd see in Japan. We had to use the technology that was there, and it required a lot of clever ideas.
When it came to building the irrigation canal, Nakamura drew inspiration from a river in Fukuoka Prefecture where he grew up. An irrigation canal was created in the middle of this river by piling up stones in the water to create a weir, a kind of low dam. Doing this slows the flow of the river. And the fact that the river flows more slowly means that the water flows smoothly into the canal. This weir was originally constructed 220 years ago, and it has stayed strong without the need for large-scale repair, playing a vital role in the region.
220 years ago, you didn't have dump trucks and things like that. The villagers had to all work together to construct it by hand, and they've maintained it for 220 years. So there was no reason why people living today couldn't do the same thing. The thought inspired me. If we tried, we could do it. It was a huge source of inspiration. Afghanistan's rivers are large, but actually, they are very similar to Japan's rivers. There are a lot of rapids, and they don't flow so strongly in the winter. But in the summer, there's rain and snow meltwater, which brings the water level up high. It's actually very similar to Japan. And it struck me that a similar approach to water would work in both countries.
The construction of the canal started in 2003. Nakamura was in charge of the project, which was entirely financed by funds collected in Japan. 6.5 years later, in 2009, a roughly 24-kilometer-long irrigation canal was completed.
When the water actually came, it meant you could harvest food. It meant trees could grow. That meant that you had building materials. You could build a home. It certainly took time, but these local communities did come back to life.
As this reconstruction was taking place, something that Nakamura heard from a local community left a deep impression on him.
It would be 52 degrees Celsius there, and so, of course, people would get heat stroke. But while we were doing this work, no one gave up. What drove them? Almost all of the people involved in the construction project were people who had originally lived there, but were forced to leave due to drought. Their villages had been turned into deserts. Their homes were gone. So many people had starved. So they'd fled to other countries as refugees. And they all heard that they would be getting water here again. And so they joined in this project. From their perspective, they were only looking for two things. They wanted 3 square meals a day, and they wanted to return to their homeland and live with their family. Just 2 things. When the irrigation canal was built, they just said so bluntly, "Dr. Nakamura, now we can live here again." I will never forget that. So now the area accommodates 600,000 people, but we're talking about 16,000 hectares, just a small percent of Afghanistan. In other parts of the country, desertification is progressing so rapidly. I know that the people of Afghanistan are scared of losing their country, that it will become a desert. Every year, it gets worse. That's the situation. So fighting against that, the work is endless. But what we've done is shown that if you tackle the problem, you can have some measure of success. Our work is proof of that. I think it's given hope to a lot of people.
Summer 2019. Nakamura returned to Japan to give a series of talks across the country. Part of his objective was to rally support for the construction of more irrigation canals, but he also simply wanted to educate people about the current situation in Afghanistan and its environmental problems.
I think everyone tends to associate Afghanistan with internal strife, civil war. The truth is that most of the government and anti-government forces, the people actually fighting these battles, are almost all mercenaries. Which is to say, people have no choice but to fight on the front lines because otherwise they can't feed their families. So if they had water, if they could farm, they would much prefer not to fight. But that's not the only thing. The problem feels foreign to us Japanese, but we could also be affected. And what I mean by that is, the warming of the planet is not just going to affect Afghanistan. It's going to be dangerous for Japan as well. And for that reason, I think we all have to think seriously about how we're going to survive. That's the era we're entering now. Light up your corner of the world. These were the words of Saicho, a Buddhist monk who lived over 1,000 years ago, when he pondered the question of national treasures. He said that it wasn't about trying to save every single person in the world or trying to make the whole world prosper. It was about tending to your own corner of the world, to the people around you. His point was that this mentality, this dedication, is what makes you a national treasure. Don't aim so big. Do what you can, one thing at a time. That's the only way you ever get things done.